Welcome back, guys. In this video, we're going to be setting up an HTML form on our Contact Us page. In our previous video, we started learning about tables and we also took a quick look at CSS classes. And in this video, we're just going to look at how we can go about setting up a form. Now, I'm sure I don't need to explain what a form is. A form is what you fill out whenever you want to present information to somebody in a structured format, right? So if you're going to a new school or starting a new job, I'm pretty sure that you're going to get forms to fill out. The problem there, though, is that those would be paper forms, but the concept is the same. They want a certain amount of information and you provide it to them. Well, online, if you're ever signing up for Facebook or Yahoo, an email address or anything like that, then you are going to be filling out forms. So forms are pretty much the gateway into your application from the outside world, meaning that somebody who is visiting your website could leave some amount of information, click submit, then you collect that information for your own purpose. So we have this website that we've been working on. We have the home page. We did the about page where we looked at having tables. And then for the contact us page, we're going to be setting up a form. I'm sure we're all familiar with going on a website and we see the contact us form where they ask us for something like maybe our name or email address, maybe our gender, and then have an area for general text. So I'm actually going to be going through the different form elements and how we can go about laying out a form on the page. Now let's skip over to the code for our contact us page and start putting in some structure. So I'm just going to put in some comments to show what is going to go. All right, so I added some comments to guide the different parts that we will be seeking to collect data for. And so I'm just going to get started, right? So to start a form, we need the tag form. So we start with FORM, and that's our form tag, right? Then inside of our form tag, we have the input tag, which has an attribute called type, which tells us the type of input that we're expecting, right? So let's start off. We say input, and this is actually a self-closing tag, all right? So when I say input, I have to give the attribute type, and then inside type, I'm going to select the type of input that I'm expecting from my user. So if you scroll down, well, Visual Studio Code is telling you all the different types that you have available to you. The most common one, most of these are, well, a lot of them are relatively new since, HTML5 actually introduced some new types, but the pretty much standard ones would be text, submit, radio, I think password, hidden, and button. All right. So, well, I don't even think button was one on checkbox rather. Button, I think, is relatively new. So a lot of them are new. You can use them. The thing is, modern browsers will be able to render them. Older browsers may not be able to handle all of them as they are in HTML5. But I'm going to start simple. So for our first name, I'm sure you can deduce that the best type of input that would be, designed for something like a first name would probably be text, because your first name is text. So the type is equal to text, and that gives us a text box. So if I just put that code in and refresh my page, then I'm going to see the text box. All right. So I can go back, and what I'm going to do is, as I put them in, I'm just going to put the comment above so that we can see exactly what it is for. So the next one would be for last name. And to me, last name, the input requirements are very similar to the input requirements for first name. So I can just duplicate this and say text again. So when I go back, I'm going to see that I have two text boxes and notice that they're really side by side. Now I'm seeing a little problem. I'm looking at this form. Imagine that you weren't the one writing the code and you landed on my website and you looked and you said, oh, okay, that's the home. Nice. About. Okay. Yeah. I see everything about you. That's nice. And then I go to contact us and I just see two random text boxes put down there. That doesn't look good, right? So the essence would be that well, you can, if you don't want them side by side, you can put a break tag in between. That's one. And two, you need definitely a label that tells me what data you're expecting me to insert here, because I don't know if you want my date of birth. I don't know if you want my blood type. It's very abstract. So when designing our forms, we have to make sure that we put in like, label is a tag that is specifically designed. Well, maybe not specifically, but it's a good tag to use when using a form, when designing a form, where I can say label and then say first name. So then inside this label, I'm defining what I expect for this input. So when I go back, then you see first name and it's alongside the text box, right? And you can design it differently. So I'm going to put a break in between the input prompt and the last name prompt. So I'm just going to do the same format with the label. So I'm going to say label and then last name. And then when I go back, I'm going to see first name, text box, last name, text box. So when the user sees this, at least they know that this text box is probably for the first name and the same for the last name. So before I move any further with the other data points that I want to collect, I'm just going to point out too that it is always a good idea to put IDs or at least names. So we have the ID attribute. You also have a name attribute. With forms, it is it is recommended. I'm recommending that you give each one a name. Now, IDs and name act very similarly, except that the ID attribute is usually used for CSS. So like we've been discovering up until now, if you give an element an ID, you can target it directly from CSS. However, when it comes to form elements, when you give it a name, it is identifiable by, let's say, the back-end code. So later on, you'll be learning about like PHP and ASP.NET, and that is how we actually get the information from the form to store in a database. So while we may not be using those right now, it's good to get into the practice that whenever you're doing a form, you give it a name attribute and you follow the same kind of convention. So you can actually give this an ID of maybe first name, right? So that would be a good ID, but you can also give it the same name, first name, right? So these two don't conflict with each other. The names or the values that you put in these two attributes can be the same, just that the ID will allow it to be identified by CSS and the name will allow it to be identified by a server-side code. All right. So I'm giving this the name and I'm going to continue by giving each one the name attribute. So I'm going to give this one name equals last name. All right. And then one more thing regarding the label. You see, when you have the label, you have an attribute called for. So you can actually say label for and then the ID of the element that this label is really for. And I'm going to show you the benefit of doing this. So I'm going to say label for first name. So this label, which has the value first name, it's printing that, but I'm saying it is for the element with the ID first name. And then we know that that is this input element. So when I go back to my screen, when I click on the label itself, notice that it selects the text box automatically. So that's what the label for does. So notice the difference. I'm going to click last name, nothing happens. I'm clicking right now, nothing is happening, right? But when I click first name where I set up the label for, it automatically selects. So if you ever go on a website and you notice that when you click the word associated with the text box and the text box lights up, that's all they did. They just said label for equals and the corresponding ID. All right. So that is the difference between the ID. ID is more for the client side, the HTML, the CSS, and to some extent the JavaScript. And then the name is more for the server side. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to say label for, and then I'm going to say last name. All right. And then let me just verify. So you see, I'm clicking, I just made the change and I'm clicking and nothing is happening because I have name, but not ID. So I can say ID is equal to last name. And after making that change, last name now behaves the same way as first name. When I click the labels, the text boxes are selected, right? So I'm just getting those things out of the way. So now the next one we have is the email address, right? So I'm going to put a break tag underneath each element or each form. All right. So I have, each form element. And then the next one would be the label. So I'm just going to copy this so I don't have to type it out, or I can just write the word label and it will generate it for me, right? So that's using up the Emmet abbreviation. So I can call this one email. All right. And then the text that it should print is email address. And then the input for this one would be of type. And if it's an email address that I want, then it's of type email. So these new data types actually give me like some default validation that allows me to kind of, simulate some validation against what is being put in, right? So I say the type is equal to email. The ID, I'm calling it email so that it matches with the for, and then I'm giving it a name for email or email address, just to show you that they can be two different values. The ID is email, but the name that the server-side language will be looking for is email address, right? Then after that, we put in a break. So I'm going to continue. So I did email address. So I'm just going to copy all of these or cut all of these and put them inside the form, so I don't have to keep on going down there and getting them. And then I'll just fill in accordingly. So now that I have the Swagger, I'm just going to copy this and then change out the label for to phone. And then the text to be displayed is going to be phone number. Then the type, let's see if there's any type that is, well, there's number, but I'm not sure if that's the same as a phone number, but then there's tel, right? So TEL is short for telephone. So I'll put that one in. The ID here is phone and the name is also phone. And then I'll leave this one and then we go on to gender. So gender is a little different. I'm still going to have my label. Well, before I put in the label, let's take a look at how we can represent gender. So generally, gender is represented by either radio buttons or by a drop-down list, because you're only allowed one selection at a time. You can't be selecting both male and female, at least in a regular system. So in this situation, I'm going to be using the radio button. So I'm going to put up the input first, and then the type for me this time is radio. So the little circle that you are allowed to select is called radio. All right. Now, I can give this one an ID and call it male, but then I'm giving it a generic name called gender. All right. I'm also going to say that the value that you have is male. So these are very important points. So we already discussed what the ID does. We can set up the label for with the ID, anything client side or visual side, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The ID is there for that. We're also looking at the fact that we have the name. And in this case, I didn't say name is equal to male. I said name is equal to gender, which is generic, which means if I have another radio button and I'm just going to duplicate that one, the ID for this one could be or would be female. The name is still gender, but then the value this time is female, right? So when it comes to radio buttons, we need to have the same name. That's how they kind of associate themselves with each other, because without the name, let me just remove the name and show you the behavior. When I have no name defined and I try to do the radio button, I can select them both, and that is wrong. No radio button should ever behave that way. All right. So when I give them both the same name, they know about each other and they know that they are siblings. They know that they are in an either or kind of relationship. See that? So for as many radio buttons as you're going to have, like I have 2 for gender, some websites may have more for whatever audience. But the fact is that for as many radio buttons as you have, they all have to have the same name. Now, the relevance of the value is that when I select the male radio button and I click submit, the server-side language is going to be looking at quite a few elements with the same name. It needs to know what value it should, save. So if I click the male radio button and then click submit, my server-side language is going to see that, okay, I see gender appearing X many times, in this case 2 times. Which one of the values was the one that was selected. And so I know that I selected male. All right, so those are good practices to have from now when you're learning static web development, because when you get into the server side stuff, then you would see that, okay, these things are very important for me. So that's one thing, but then if you look back, you don't know which one is male and which one is female. We didn't put in any labels, of course. So I need to make sure that I have representation of what each one is for. So I'm putting the radio button, then I'm going to say radio button for male, and then the text here is male. And I'm just going to break at this point, and then I'm just going to copy this label since I already did it and paste it. And this one is for the female, and I'm just changing out the text, working a bit, smarter, not harder. So after doing that, and then we review, then we see male, female. All right. And then that kind of looks like a big cliffhanger. So I'm going to put a little, maybe a heading, maybe an H6 above that, just to say select gender, right? So at the end of the day, this is your application. Well, this one, that kind of looks very intrusive. So I'll maybe change this to a span. All right. So it's just going to go there and then a break tag. So because I know the behavior of the span, I'm just putting all of that in place. And then it's going to say, okay, select gender, breakpoint, and then I have male or female. All right. So that is the behavior of the radio button. Now, next up would be reason for contact. So this one I want to show as a drop down. Sometimes you're filling out a form and then you click a drop down list or combo box list, different, contexts call it different things, but the same net effect. You click it, it drops down, it shows you a number of options. You select one and you move forward. So that one is called the select. So we actually have a tag called select. And then in select, inside of the opening tag, you want to give it the ID, of course. So this would be reasons. And you want to give it the name also, reason, right? So I'm calling the ID reasons, but I'm calling the name reason. Or you could call it reasons, so that's fine. So let's just keep it, on par. And then inside of our select tag, we're going to have the options for selection. So literally you have option. I open and close option. You give it the text that it should display. So let's say one reason you could be contacting us could be for a complaint. Another reason could be for a query. And then the third one could be for other. So I'm giving the user three options to select from as to why they would be, contacting me. So this is one way. So this is what is going to get displayed. So whatever you put in between the open and close option, that is what gets displayed. But then remember that we're just thinking ahead and thinking about when we go server side, the fact that we need to save stuff. So we gave it the name, but just like our radio buttons where we had the value associated with the same name so that we could distinguish which one was selected, I have to say that this value or the value for this option would be the word complaint, right? So when it's going to the server side and I'm saying, okay, why was the person complaining? I'm going to look inside of reasons, which has three possible options. And then I know that the selected one would have had a value of complaint. So I know that this person is probably lodging a complaint, right? So I'm going to do that with each of these. So I'm going to put in value for query, and then I'm going to put in value for other, sorry. All right. So complaint, query, and other. All right. Those are the three potential options for our select list. So when I go back to my browser and look, I'm going to see complaint, query, other. All right. And well, it's still not telling me what it's for because I didn't indicate the label. So we know that we have to, or it is a good practice to include our labels. So I'm going to say label for, and this label is for reasons. And then I'm just going to say select reason for contact. That's the label. All right. So it really doesn't matter how much text you put inside the label. I'm just saying select reason for contact. And then the person knows what this drop down list is for, right? Next up, we have comments. So comments now would probably be in a text box, but not the regular text box like what we've seen so far with just one line. The comments would be, if I have a complaint, I want to write you an essay. So you want to give me a data structure or an input type or a visual presentation of an input type that would allow me to type this essay. So what we have for this is called a text area. All right, so you open and close the text area. And then when you do that, you literally get this text area, this area for multiple lines of text. Unfortunately, by default, this is the behavior. The person can expand and contract it. And at runtime, it will augment kind of probably betray a design, but it always snaps back to a default at any point. So the thing is, if you put anything in between the open and close tag of text area, then that text will be in the text box by default, which you probably don't want. So you don't want to do that. Common attributes. So first, let me put the label for this. So I can say label for. So of course, we know we can put in the ID in the opening tag. And then that would be, I'm going to call it comments. So the ID for this is the comments. The name is also comments, right? And then other common attributes would be rows. So you have the rows, which means by default, how many lines or how many spaces going is that vertically? How many lines going vertically do you want by default? So I could say I want 10. And then how many columns do I want? Meaning how many calls do I want is columns. And I could say, let's say 20. So I want it with 20 characters going to the right by default and the 10 characters going down by default. So when I refresh, you're going to see that. So this is the 20, that is the 10. So if I reduce this to maybe 5, then it will look a bit neater. All right, so that doesn't look so bad. And let me just put in a breakpoint here between these two because I didn't put a breakpoint after my select list. And so now everything is moving down. So I didn't change out the text for the label. So write comment, or let me just say comment. All right, so it's coming on nicely. We have our form, some text boxes, radio buttons, select list now, our text area. And now that we're done with all of the data collection elements, there's a very, very important thing that is missing, which is our submit button, right? So let me just put in the break tag to make sure that it doesn't go where it's not supposed to go. And then I'm going to have the final one, which is input type is equal to, you see button, and you click a button, but before there was button, there was always submit. So I feel safer using submit. So I'm going to say submit. All right. And I can change the value of the submit button because if I say submit by default, the button is not going to say anything. So if I say value is equal to submit, then you see the word appear, or I can say value is equal to contact us. Whatever it is that you want the button to say, you make sure you put it as the value. All right. So I'm just going to keep it simple and say submit. And this is the submit button that will bring me to the next page. So usually when you are filling out a form and you're supposed to go to another page, or when you click submit, you usually go to another page, right? So when I click submit here, nothing is happening. It refreshed the page because by default, the submit button knows that it should try and go somewhere else. We didn't tell it to go anywhere else. So it tried, but it realized we didn't say where it should go. So it just came right back to where it's coming from, right? So we can include what we call an action in the form tag. So I'm going to go all the way back up to the open form tag, and then we're going to define what we call an action. So our action is where we want the page to go after the form has been submitted. So you have the attribute action, and then you're just going to put in a page name. So I only have 3 pages right now. But let's say I wanted a page that said you have success. Thank you for contacting us, right? So I'm going to just create a new file and I'm going to call it post contact.html. and I'm calling it post contact because literally I mean post as in after. After you contact me, this is where you go. That's all I mean by that. I'm also just going to copy the entire layout from another page. So I just copied that one from the About Us, and I'm just going to remove the tables that are there inside of the content. I really don't need them. And then I'm going to take out all of that. And all this page is going to say, I'm changing out the H1 tag that was there by default. I'm just going to say, thank you for contacting us. All right. So thank you for contacting us. And then the expectation now is that when the person clicks submit on our contact us page, it goes over to this page. Of course, it's important that it maintains the layout and the nav bar and so on, because after it goes to this page, they need to probably be able to go home or about or wherever they need to go afterwards, right? So let's just look at how that works. So I'm going to say action is equal to the page that I wanted to go to, which in this case is postcontact.html. This is also important once again with server-side languages because especially in PHP, your action is where you will probably put all of the code that will process what is coming in from the form, right? So after I submit the form, inside of this page that the action is pointing to, I would then say, okay, give me everything from the form and manipulate it and store it in a database, etc., etc. Once again, that's for the future. We're just thinking about now, but we're coding efficiently so that when we have to transform this, it's not a major overhaul, right? So we say contact us, and we say that when we click submit, we want to go to postcontact.html. So I'm just going to go back here and I'm going to fill out this form quickly, right? And select all that I need to select, put in some data, fill it out, click submit, and then we see our page going to postcontact.html. And if you look in the browser, in the string, you're actually going to see every single thing that I put in the form being presented up here, right? So you remember that we said gender is the name and the value we want is male. That's where it comes in handy, right? The reasons, and then the one selected was complaint, all right, comments. So once again, we're seeing all of the names that we defined for the controls and the values that were put in. The ampersand is, well, that just means and. So we're saying all the data is first name and this, first name equals that and, last name equals that and it just goes and. The modulus 40 is just a representation for the @ sign because it can't parse the @ sign like that. So that's really how a form works, right? So whenever you're on the internet now and you're filling out a form and you click submit, you can think of the behavior just like what we just experienced. Now that's pretty much it for forms. At the most basic level, that's how we go about it. We have a label and then we have a control. Remember to put in your IDs and your names and of course formatting so that everything doesn't look so chucked up. So I put one breakpoint, otherwise everything would have been going in one line until it breaks to the next line. But then you can probably put in, 2 breakpoints to separate them. And so you have a bit more daylight between each requirement. But in the next video, I'm actually going to be showing you how to put a form or lay out a form in a more structured manner using the table. All right, so we've looked at tables. Now we've looked at forms. In the next video, we're going to look at how we can use both of them to have a nice structure on our website.